This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is brought to you by The Final Six, a new YA science fiction novel by Alexandra Monir. Beth Revis, author of the New York Times bestselling Across the Universe series, writes, "A breathtakingly real look at love, loss, and the dangers of space, The Final Six skyrockets into twists and turns I never saw coming." Learn more about the book over at alexandramonir.com.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 298 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new movie Annihilation, directed by Alex Garland and based on the novel by Jeff Vandermeer. And I just want to mention that we interviewed Alex Garland back in episode 147 and Jeff Vandermeer back in episode 103, so definitely go check those out if you missed them. And this will include spoilers for the movie Annihilation, as well as the novel Annihilation, the first book in the Southern Reach trilogy, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Jason Kehe, who you may remember from our panel on the Wired Fiction issue back in episode 236. He's a senior associate editor at Wired, focusing on magazine stories, and you should all go check out his Wired.com review, Annihilation is a thrilling, terrifying, surrealist trip. So Jason, welcome to the show.
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Then next up, we've got Leah Schnelbach, who you may remember from our panel on Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency back in episode 281. She's a staff writer for Tor.com and a fiction editor of the No Tokens Journal, and her fiction appears in journals such as Joyland, Volume 1 Brooklyn, and Madcap Review. And you should all go check out her Tor.com review, Beauty and Terror Collide in Alex Garland's Annihilation. So Leah, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me back.
And also joining us today is Andrew Willett. He's an editor at the New York Times, and his fiction appears in the anthology Thought Crime Experiments, in the 2016 finalists anthology for the Saints and Sinners LGBT Literary Festival, and in the current issue of Abyss and Apex. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
And today's show is brought to you by The Final Six by Alexandra Monir. And here's a description of the book. It says, set in the near future, this action-packed YA novel, already optioned by Sony Pictures, will take readers out of this world and on a quest to become one of 6 teens sent on a mission to Jupiter's moon. This is the next must-read for fans of Illumini and The Martian. When Leo and Naomi are drafted, along with 22 of the world's brightest teenagers, into the International Space Training Camp, their lives are forever changed. Overnight, they become global celebrities in contention for one of the 6 slots to travel to Europa, Jupiter's moon, and establish a new colony, leaving their planet forever. With Earth irreparably damaged, the future of the human race rests on their shoulders. For Leo, an Italian championship swimmer, this kind of purpose is a reason to go on after losing his family. But Naomi, an Iranian-American science genius, is suspicious of the ISTC and the fact that a similar mission failed under mysterious circumstances, killing the astronauts aboard. She fears something equally sinister awaits the final 6 beneath Europa's surface. In this cutthroat atmosphere, surrounded by strangers from around the world, Naomi finds an unexpected friend in Leo. As the training tests their limits, Naomi and Leo's relationship deepens with each life-altering experience they encounter. But it's only when the finalists become fewer and their destinies grow nearer that the two can fathom the full weight of everything at stake, the world, the stars, and their lives. Kendar Blake, #1 New York Times bestselling author of 3 Dark Crowns, writes, I sat down to read a bit before bed, and then it was 2 a.m. and the book was half gone. This is a space competition of epic proportions, loaded with disturbing hidden secrets and intense action. Your eyes will be glued to the page. And Ramina Russell, New York Times bestselling author of the Zodiac series, writes, compelling, cinematic, and fascinating. I can't wait to read what happens next in the mission to Europa. So again, the book is The Final Six by Alexandra Monir, and you can learn more over at alexandramonir.com. All right, so now let's get to our panel. Okay, so I want to start with Andrew. One reason I wanted to have you particularly on the show, Andrew, is because you just read Annihilation. And I read it 4 years ago when it first came out, when I interviewed Jeff Vandermeer. So I wanted to have someone who had a very fresh recollection of the story, because the way I experienced it, at least, it's a kind of hard book to remember what happened. The book, for me, reading the book is sort of like having a weird dream. And afterward, it's kind of like having a weird dream where you sort of remember how weird and cool it was, but the details sort of slip from your mind, which was my experience anyway. Do you hear where I'm coming from on that? Did you have a similar experience reading it?
Absolutely. The book, I think, it works very hard to maintain that bizarre dreamlike tone. And so that was one of the things that made me really looking forward to seeing the film in the first place, was just how on earth do you adapt something like this for film?
Yeah, and turns out how you adapt it for film is you change it pretty
Exactly. You chuck it out the window and blow up the alien with a grenade.
Did I mention there's a spoiler warning?
Too late.
Oops.
But so how about Leah? You read the book, right? Do you have any thoughts about the book?
I read the book at this point, I think, within about 6 months of it coming out, and I had a very similar response to it, that I read it in kind of, I believe, just one sitting, and then struggled to remember what I had read. And it was a very interesting experience, because each time I would reread parts of it, it's very immersive, and it's a really sensory book. But then when I would finish reading it, I would have to really work to remember specific quotes or incidents or anything, which I think it's a fascinating way to do a horror story, where it's very experiential, but then it sort of fades the further you get away from it, and it is very dreamlike. I think that's like the best way to describe it.
Yeah, so it's not just me. I guess I'll just mention too that so I read Annihilation, and then I read the sequel, Authority. The third book, Acceptance, wasn't out at the time, and I didn't read that. And then I read Jeff Vandermeer's book on writing, Wonder Book, and I read all three of those, I think, in like 2 days, which also is not the best situation for remembering exactly what happened in any of those books. But how about Jason? Sort of, what is your story with reading Annihilation?
I think I read Annihilation at least a year ago. We chose it for Wired Book Club. And then we read the second and third in the trilogy as well. And then we spoke to Jeff Vandermeer afterward. And I had the same experience that you guys had. I mean, I guess I wouldn't call it a dream so much as a nightmare, but then it had this weird kind of echoing effect where it also incepted nightmares in all of us who were reading it. So it itself was this kind of dream, and then we all started dreaming about it. So it was dreams about dreams, and then we all kind of lost sense of up and down.
So what did you talk to Jeff Vandermeer about?
Sort of exactly that. And I think the story, I might have this wrong, started for him as a dream as well. So it's just dreams all the way down. And this was just as it was announced that it was going to be made into a movie. So we were asking him a bit about that and his involvement, which was very minimal. But I remember the conversation being kind of mind-blowing in much the way that the book was. I mean, he's as weird and wonderful as his writing.
Yeah. I mean, Leah, you interviewed Jeff Vandermeer too. I think I saw, right?
Mm-hmm. I did. Unfortunately, it was only email. I didn't actually get to talk to him. But that was in relation to Born, which it's also a fascinating reading experience. But that one it's sort of about a near future dystopia. And it has a giant flying bear named Mord. So I ended up reading that one also very, very quickly, and then trying to come up with questions that hadn't already been asked a billion times. And we mostly ended up talking over email about this sort of idea of new weird, and how he was like constructing a dystopia. So
yeah, so everyone go check that out. So Andrew, I guess you're the only person here who hasn't interviewed Jeff Vandermeer, or have you? I don't know.
No, I have not had the pleasure.
All right, but so what was it like, Andrew, having just read the book and having it be fresh in your minds, going to see this movie? Kind of what was that experience like?
Well, I mean, it was certainly challenging to experience the movie strictly on its own terms, because there is that perpetual little voice in your head that's taking notes and doing the compare and contrast thing. This never happened. Oh, look, they've changed this. And hey, where did this plotline go? And things like that. It made it difficult to just stay in the moment and enjoy the story that was being presented. Which was a little frustrating, especially because there were a lot of things to enjoy about the new aspects of the story.
So what were some of the big differences that really jumped out at you just from the outset?
From the outset, they dial back the paranoia about the Southern Reach as an organization. The sense of secret keeping and hidden agendas among the various members of the team is really nerfed, particularly when we're talking about the psychologist. All of the matters about post-hypnotic suggestion are gone. And that plotline, as the as Lena is understanding how they are being manipulated by the people who have sent them into Area X unfolds, that's a huge element of the emotional tone of the book and the action itself. So I missed that. It also means that you need a new reason to say the word annihilation somewhere in your screenplay. There was no mystery about how they end up inside Area X. That's one of the first great things about the story, I feel, is they cross the border in a way that none of them can remember. And, they walk down a hallway, if memory serves, and then there's a blink, and they've crossed they've crossed the veil. And in this case, they just walk across it calmly as you please. They change Lena's backstory. They eliminate the tower and the creeper, which are possibly the most memorable elements of the book. They're certainly the ones that people talk about.
Point of order, sorry, I think it's the crawler, not the creeper.
Is it? I beg your pardon.
Well, it's creepy crawly. So
it is indeed.
I mean, granted, there are some serious parallels between creeping and crawling, but I just think for accuracy's sake.
I accept your critique, and I thank you for it. On the other hand, they get, because the other team members get more screen time before they get killed off in horrible ways, we have more of an opportunity to really develop interpersonal relationships among them, which is, I think, a smart choice for a film. And it means that you miss them as people when they get removed from the board, instead of just noticing their sudden absence and finding that disturbing. And then, of course, there's the Hollywood ending, where you blow up the threat and you save the day, except for, dun-dun-dun, the suggestion that perhaps not everything has been solved and maybe there will be an exciting sequel. I strongly doubt there's going to be a sequel to this film. But they definitely made changes that served the needs of a movie. Doing things that movies need and things that movies do well, as opposed to things that books do well.
Yeah, well, let me say, I mean, Alex Garland has said in no uncertain terms that he's not doing a sequel to this. So it was certainly not made with a sequel, a planned sequel.
Sure.
I think we should just say what this is about, just for people who, are listening to this without having watched the movie or whatever, or watching this far in the future or something. So, and the elements that the movie and the book share are basically that there's this mysterious area that's, I think, in Florida somewhere called Area X, which has become sort of taken over by some mysterious force. And there's a government agency called the Southern Reach, and they keep sending people in to investigate, and those people keep not coming back. And the story concerns a group of women scientists who go in. And are there any other significant parallels between things that the book and the... How about Leah? Are there any other things I should mention here that the book and the movie share in common?
Well, I think the Oscar Isaac's character, the husband, is... he is a member of the previous expedition, and he is the one who's come back, which I think in the book more people have come back, but he has come back very obviously not quite as he left, and that ends up being part of the inciting reason for Lena's character, who is just the biologist in the book, to go on her own expedition into Area X.
Does he die in the book? Again, it's been a long time since I read it.
I believe so. He's dead before the biologist leaves.
Yeah. And then their relationship is told in flashback, I think.
In the third book, though, there's a suggestion that maybe he transformed into, I don't know, an owl or something in Area X. So whether he's really dead or if a version of him died is sort of...
Right. The thing that looked like her husband that returned definitely died before she left.
All right, and this is not going to involve spoilers for the second and third book, so we're going to let that one slide. But
no, sorry, everyone.
No more, because I haven't.
Can you really spoil something that's so open to interpretation?
Well, I haven't read the third book, so I don't want to know what happens in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of people have probably watched this movie, and are not going to go read the books. So I want to keep it, fresh for them. But yeah, so Jason, do you have anything else you want to add about sort of the basic setup of this movie here?
I guess I would just sort of gently disagree with Andrew. I mean, that's sort of at a superficial level, it's a radical departure from the book. But as we sort of talked about at the beginning of this conversation, the finer points of the plot sort of fade very quickly from memory after, even 6 months of reading the book. What stays with you is the tone. And as a kind of tone adaptation, I think Alex Garland's movie completely and comprehensively captures exactly what Jeff Vandermeer was going for in the book. So on the one hand, sort of play by play, it's maybe not the loyalist adaptation, but sort of if he's trying to do what the author of the source material intended, I think he has sort of radically succeeded and maybe done even a better job than Jeff Vandermeer at kind of keeping that consistent tone of dread throughout the entire movie, just as it was in the book. So that's what I would say.
I agree with the tone very much. I think that the tone of the film is it's gorgeous and really unique.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you as well, for what it's worth. For all of the changes on the superficial level, it is absolutely, right. It's a great adaptation of the spirit of the material.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. And coming out of this movie, I was just walking down the sidewalk with the lamps overhead, and I just felt like I was on an alien planet. I mean, it just gave me such a weird feeling watching this movie.
I mean, I sat in the theater as the credits started rolling, and I cry a lot in movies, but I don't really cry from fear. And I actually don't really get scared too often in movies, but I sat there as the credits were rolling, and a few tears sort of leaked out of my paralyzed body. I was just completely overwhelmed by the movie and kind of terrified.
Yeah, because I would say, it was interesting. The last movie I watched that I really, really liked was Arrival. And that one I had much more of an emotional reaction where I just felt emotionally like sad or, melancholy, whatever you would say. And this movie I had an equally intense sort of physical reaction, but it was just awe. I was just sitting there in absolute awe. And I didn't have, it wasn't as emotional for me, but it was just more like, just mind blown, like muscles limp, just like what, like holy crap, But Andrew, it sounds like you were, I don't know, you had sort of mixed feelings about the movie, or how would you kind of rank it overall?
It's strange. It's been very hard to pin down, since I saw it. There was a lot that I really liked. And I think it far outweighs the parts that frustrated me. If anything, I am only truly frustrated in what feels like too neat an ending for a story whose in the book, I really enjoyed how open-ended and unresolved its conclusion was. And it felt a little too tidy in its final minutes to me.
It's interesting you say that, Andrew, because I felt that this movie was pretty straightforward to me. But if you look at reactions, a lot of people are totally baffled by this movie. They're totally confused by the ending. So I guess it seems like you and I have a different reaction than a lot of people do to this movie and to the ending in particular.
It just seemed this is a far too big and weird a mystery to just blow up and say that's how that's the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so how about Leah? So what did you just overall? How would you rank this movie?
Well, I saw a lot of movies this weekend, weirdly enough. I ended up also I finally saw Get Out, and I saw Mute. I sat down and watched Mute to review it 2 days ago. So it's been an interesting thing of like watching that many movies so quickly that are all sort of different takes on genre films. I don't know if I have seen a film that has made me feel quite what this one made me feel. And I think that's what I've come away with it. Like, I'm not trying to think how to put this in a good way. It's not that it wasn't thoughtful. I thought it was very thoughtful, and I've thought about it quite a bit, but I think I've actually felt quite a bit more, if that makes sense. that I just keep dwelling on certain images from the film and just kind of sitting with the images themselves and thinking about those images and turning them over and over again to see how my feelings toward them change. Because I ended up writing a follow-up piece, which I don't usually do, on Monday, just to talk about Tessa Thompson's arc in the film, because some of the imagery to do with her was so strong to me and so just moving that I couldn't walk away from it. And I finally had to try to write about it just to figure out how I felt. I think I agree with you about Arrival. Like it might have been that long since I've seen a film that has stuck with me to that extent that I've wanted to keep writing about it. Yeah.
well, and I agree with you, Leah, that this movie is really stuck in my head, and partly that's because I've gone to watch it every day, basically since it came out. And honestly, if we weren't recording this panel right now, I would be watching it again right now. And I don't watch movies, like rewatch movies in theaters very often. I think Fellowship of the Ring is the last movie that I saw repeatedly in the theater. So I really like this movie, obviously. But let's get Jason. What was your sort of score of this movie? How do you rank it?
I think I agree with basically what Leah said. It sort of left me feeling something I didn't expect to feel, was this just sort of existential terror. I don't know. I mean, it's like I said, I rarely feel that way sitting in a theater after a movie. This sense that like I don't even want to get up because I'm too afraid to. And I also agree with the Tessa Thompson arc. I mean, we can talk about this more if we want to, but what I was really wrestling with, even as I was watching the movie, was the sense that Area X is cancer, or is this disease that spreads through both space and bodies. And part of what her character represents, at least as I saw it, was this sort of acceptance of that. And then I started thinking about, is the whole movie trying to seduce you into kind of craving disease in some way? Because a question we asked Jeff Vandermeer, a year ago was, would you enter Area X if you could? And he couldn't answer it. And I think it's because you kind of want to, but you're also terrified to. And this sort of, I don't know, romanticizing corruption in some way, or I just started playing with wild ideas that I normally don't think about after a movie, ends. So for that, I'm really grateful and really love the movie as a result.
Yeah. Well, so Leah, so you were mentioning Tessa Thompson. Why don't we just go through the characters? So there are 5 women scientists, I said, who go into Area X. Why don't you just sort of run us through those characters?
Well, there's the biologist, who is Natalie Portman, and that's Lena. So she is sort of our audience proxy character, I would say, that she's the one that's sort of learning about it more than the others, and going through, like, we follow her on her entire journey through it. Ventress is the psychologist, who is played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who is extraordinary. Just so good. And she is, I think, essentially the leader of the troupe. She is the person that was doing the psychological testing on other people that they sent in who didn't come back. So in some ways, it's kind of hinted that she knows Lena's husband better than Lena knew her, kinda, because she had to interview him before he went in. So she knows some things that Lena's not terribly happy about, I think. Gina Rodriguez's character, I keep blanking on her name.
Anya.
She's an EMT. Tessa Thompson's character is Radek, and she is a physicist. And then Tuva Novotny plays Shepard, and she is she's an anthropologist.
And we should note probably as well that, and I think Leah and I both mentioned this in our reviews, that in the movie, Alex Garland gives the characters names. In the book, they're known just by their professions. The biologist, the psychologist. In the movie, it's Lena and Dr. I forget her name in the movie. But it's interesting that we forget the names because I don't know. I really struggled initially with naming them and what that did to the movie and the tone, but I kind of came to accept that because it's an adaptation, a very specific adaptation, he's sort of allowed to stamp it with a very individual, in a very individual way. And I think naming the characters lets the audience know that, hey, this is my version of this book.
I think it also makes it possible for the characters to have conversations with each other. Because the book is all presented as journal entries, the narrator can say the psychologist said this and the soldier said that, but to speak to one another and interact as people, they have to have names.
Well, and speak about each other particularly. It would be really weird if, Lena said to Cass, well, what do you think about what the I don't know who the psychologist said or whatever, it would just sound very strange.
Exactly.
Yeah, a bit stilted.
Well, so Andrew, what did you think of these characters? Did you like them? Do you have any?
I did like them. I'm sorry. I have a terrible time with names, and actually, it was more convenient for me to fall back on the book habit of thinking about them in terms of their roles than it was who they were. But the anthropologist I found really sympathetic and interesting because she's the one who welcomes our POV character into the fold once they're out in the field. She seems the most sympathetic, so of course she has to be the first one to die. Tessa Thompson was great, and watching her seduction by Area X was really terrific. The psychologist was creepy in all the ways that you wanted her to be, even when she wasn't actively undermining her team the way she does in the book. No, it was a terrific ensemble.
So sorry, Andrew. Other point of order, like the first person to die is Cass, who I think is a geomorphologist.
Have I fused people?
Is Anya
totally appropriate, but not helpful?
Is she an anthrop? I forget it. What Anya's? No, she's an EMT in the movie,
right? The paramedic,
the Gina Rodriguez character.
Yeah,
right. But she outlives Shepard. Sorry, I keep going by last names. Shepard is the one that gets attacked by the boar.
Right, but she's some sort of geologist, isn't she?
Is she a geologist? I thought she was an anthropologist.
She's a geomorphologist. She said she was studying the magnetic fields of the shimmer. Can we talk?
Oh man, see, it really has. It's rewired our brains.
I don't think there is an anthropologist.
Maybe I've made the anthropologist up.
There was an anthropologist in the book.
Oh, that could be okay. Well, I need to see it again, clearly, and remember where I was when I went into the theater.
I think it's kind of nice that you confuse them. As individual as you want these women to be, they also, I don't know, exist in relation to each other so much, and they kind of bleed and blend into each other. I don't know. I kind of like the idea that those four, in the book it's 3 others, in the movie it's 4 others, they all are sort of ethereal types, and then Natalie Portman's character, Lena, the biologist, is the only one that feels sort of fully human and whole. So I was kind of liking the fact that I sometimes forgot who was doing what, or, who was the anthropologist, if there even is an anthropologist. Not to kind of individualize any of these characters, but in a way they kind of serve overlapping roles.
Well, just the scene where Lena first meets them, where they're kind of having drinks on the roof of the building, just felt they just seemed to have a very easy camaraderie, and it seems like they seemed like real people. And I mean, I thought all the characters were great, but in particular, Anya just struck me as a very sort of down to earth kind of person, like that I could imagine meeting her in real life, of a type that you often don't see in sort of science fiction horror kinds of movies.
It's true. Their camaraderie is the right word, and it was actually reminiscent of all things Aliens. The military cohort in around the dinner table. Before everything goes to hell, these seem like interesting people you'd want to hang out with.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that, Andrew, because this movie the plot is actually fairly similar to Aliens. I was thinking that. It's sort of like, to my mind, it's sort of like Aliens meets Steven Soderbergh's Solaris, Which is why I'm sort of baffled that so many people seem to be having problems understanding what's going on, or like saying that it has no structure or that it's too confusing or something. Because it seems to me to have a very conventional structure. I mean, there's a bunch of people and they go into a dangerous situation and they die off one by one. And I mean, just from the beginning, right? You basically know what's going to happen, right? You know that they're going to go in here, they're going to die off one by one. Lena and Ventress are going to be the last survivors. They're going to get it to the lighthouse. Weird shit's going to happen. Lena's the only one who makes it out. And then there's also a very conventional character arc for Lena, right? Where she has this broken relationship with her husband because she was unfaithful, and then that gets sort of reforged in a very weird way. But nevertheless, that relationship gets reforged by the end of the movie, and so it just seems like there's enough very conventional plotting going on here that I was just surprised so many people seem to think that the movie is just so out there or all over the place or something.
Yeah, I think it was just the ending, that since the ending is so, I mean, it's quite different from the book, but then it's sort of a track jumping moment when she's kind of facing off with the other version of herself. And I think maybe it was the sort of looking into that sort of orb and then having to do that sort of dance with herself. I think that just really terrified people in a way that sort of made them short out when they've tried to talk about it. Because I mean, it definitely shorted me out, even though I was sort of the comparison I made in my review, and the thing I kept thinking about was actually Contact, and the way sort of going inside the orb felt to me very much like Jodie Foster in the Trip and Contact, but I was not prepared for the dance and the idea that she and this other aspect of herself were going to get in this fascinating, violent dance fight and crush each other. It sort of, to me at least, it kind of took the thing in a very different emotional direction than what I was expecting.
All right, well, let's come back to the ending in a little bit, because I want to.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped ahead a little.
I have a lot more I want to say about that, but so they go into the Area X, and they start encountering mutations, kind of, plants or animals that are interminglings of DNA. I think they go. Is the crocodile? Do they encounter the They encounter the crocodile shark before the base, right? Is the crocodile shark the first thing that happens?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Jason, tell us about the crocodile shark.
Oh, well, I think crocodile shark kind of covers it. It's a crocodile with shark teeth, I think. It's in some sort of derelict pond-side hut that the women go into, and then it grabs Tessa Thompson's character and sort of spits her back out. And then Natalie Portman, Lena, whips out her gun and shoots it in the head. And it's the first sort of instance of what Area X can do to living creatures, which is sort of hybridize them and mutate them and blend them and create these kind of monstrous genetic, mutants.
And I do not remember particularly this hybridizing idea from the book. Is that in there?
I was wondering the same thing. I mean, one of the coolest differences for me was that in the book, the biologist specializes in transitional environments, and in the movie, she specializes in mutating cells. And so Area X in the book is a sort of area in transition. Area X in the movie is kind of is much more clearly a mutation or a cancer or a corruption. And that's reflected in these hybrid monsters.
I guess I should have asked Andrew, since he's the one who just read the book. Andrew, is there any hybridizing going on in the book?
Not that I remember. Things are definitely twisted and strange. Well, there's a dolphin late in the book that the biologist sees swimming past, and it slows down and looks at her with eyes that are distinctly human. So there is definitely a sense that people and animals are being transformed into other people or animals. But I don't remember the sort of, it's a shark, it's an alligator, that kind of blenderization.
Okay. Yeah. I don't. As I was saying, I don't think it's in the book, but I wanted to check. Okay. So they blow away the shark alligator, and then they get in these boats and they're paddling through the swamp, and we get some sort of indications of a little bit of backstory of why they would go on this basically suicide mission. As we mentioned, no one else has ever really come back from this from Area X, except I guess Lena's husband, sort of. Leah, you were saying in your review, did you say something in your review that you were like you had mixed feelings about these sort of little snippets of backstory or something?
Yeah, that was the one scene that I kind of checked out during. It felt to me like it was pushing me out of the movie because it just felt so expository, where Shepard is just sort of running Lena through why everyone came to Area X, and it sort of just felt a little bit too, this person's an addict, so of course they're going to be here. This person was suicidal once, so of course they're going to be here. And it just felt too reductive compared to the idea that they've sort of been drawn to this for a myriad of reasons. Because I think in order to go on a trip like that, I think you'd have to have a lot of different reasons. And not just, I was depressed for a while, so I decided to go on this possible suicide mission and transform into a different creature. So that frustrated me because I thought that if they wanted to go that way and talk about how each of them was damaged in a different way, I thought that they could do it through just by showing instead of telling, to be as basic as that just, like learning in a more organic way that someone had been depressed or that someone had had addiction problems or something. I thought that would have kind of woven into the rest of the story more, because this just felt, I don't know, it just felt a little bit hacky, to be honest, that she just sort of knew all these things and just blurted it all out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of things in this movie that could be, like, moments that could be improved by being developed more or expanded more. But then the more I saw it, I was kind of like, well, I think I think it's the right length. I don't think it should be any longer, given, it has to sustain this sort of kind of weird feeling. And so I don't know, I'm sort of torn on this because there are certain moments, particularly I'll get to later in the movie, that I think would be stronger if they were expanded, but I don't think the movie should be any longer. So I'm kind of at this weird, place with that where I'm not sure what I would actually change without making it longer. What do you think about that, Leah? Do you have any like specific things you would like tweak a little bit, or do you think there should just be more character development?
Well, I think specifically just with relation to that, and I know I keep going back to Tessa Thompson, but I think for whatever reason she ended up becoming my favorite character. I think it would have been, for that one, especially given what happens later on, if we had just seen the scars on her arms rather than Shepard talking about, like, you'll notice that she always wears long sleeves so that you don't see the scars. I think it would have been more interesting if her sleeve had been pushed up for a few minutes and we had seen it. Even with Shepard, because for whatever reason, there's the trend happening in sci-fi that like every woman has to have lost a child, and that has to be a trauma that keeps being revisited, which I'm finding kind of odd that this keeps cropping up. But in Shepard's case, the fact that she had lost her daughter and then she was carrying a toy clipped to her backpack the whole time. And I was assuming at least that was a memento of her daughter. And I think seeing that for a while and noticing it gradually become more prominent, and then someone else lets her know what happened to Shepard's daughter, rather than Shepard just sort of saying it. I think that might have been more powerful without having to add, because I agree with you completely on the runtime. I think it was pretty perfect, but just to sort of build it in more slowly. So, but those are the only two that I can think of, like offhand, that I would have changed if I was Mr. Garland.
Well, how about Jason? What do you think about what Leah's saying about the way that the damage of these characters like is written and is shown?
I had the exact same problems that Leah did, and I thought that, there were several flashbacks to the biologist, Natalie Portman's character, and I think his name is Kane, Oscar Isaac's character, her husband, in their bedroom. And it was just way too many. It kept pulling me out. And the movie is divided into, I guess you can call them chapters. And at the beginning of each one, if I remember correctly, it flashes back to a scene, like I said, in their bedroom. And I think part of it was to sort of set up this backstory and do the same thing he was doing with the other characters, which was try to provide some sort of motivation for why, but I really didn't need any of it. And it kept pulling me out of the nightmare. And it was a really conventional kind of backstory too. She's having an affair with a colleague and is kind of torn up about it, because he's away all the time. And I just, sort of exactly like what Leah was saying. It felt like that was the sort of laziest part of the adaptation for me. And if we needed to cut anything, I would have cut so much of that particular, plot.
I mean, if you listen to Alex Garland talk about the theme of this movie, he says that it's self-destruction and I thought this was really interesting, but he said, you meet people and no matter how functional they seem, if you get to know them well enough, you start seeing ways in which they're sabotaging themselves somehow. And so he thought that was interesting to draw a parallel between that and the sort of programmed cell death. Where now I forget what it's called. It's the something limit, the number of times the cell can divide. It's like 50 or something. And that's why, as Lena says in the movie, why you can't just live forever. So I think that's all cool. And so I think that for that theme, that Lena has to have some self-destructive thing that she's done. And it kind of makes sense that she cheated on Kane and then he gets heartbroken and then that's why he volunteers for this basically suicide mission. I agree it feels kind of conventional, but I'm not sure what else. Nothing really pops into my mind of what else you would do that would work with that theme.
I just think there are ways to do it much more subtly. I mean, it's all well and good to have that as your motivation, but exactly like Leah said, you don't need to have characters speaking the lines. You can suggest it in any number of ways, which the book did really well, even though it's obviously a book and had the opportunity to spell out any number of motivations, but the book was much subtler in that regard, which is interesting. And when he adapts it sort of visually, it was unfortunate for me at least, and I love the movie, of course, but unfortunate to see kind of those elements be so literalized.
Well, yeah, I did the scenes with the guy she was cheating on Kane with. The dialogue felt weirdly on the nose. There's a part where he says, "Do you think he knows about our affair?" Where it just seemed like in real life he would just say, "Do you think he knows?" or something. And it seems like it was written just for maybe the slower people in the audience. Okay, no, this isn't her husband. This is another guy, and she's having an affair, and this is a flashback and stuff. I guess, as I was saying, maybe still wasn't enough for a lot of people to be clear. But I know, Andrew, what do you think? What do you think about all this stuff?
I kind of hated the new backstory for Lena and the introduction of this affair. It seemed too conventional for a story that it was in so many ways so weird and unique. And it also seemed like it made her husband's motivation for going into Area X too pat. It sort of made it Lena's fault. You broke everything and your husband died because of it, or is dying because of it. So now you have to go save everything. And the book was much more subtle in the construction of two characters who cared about each other a lot, but had some fundamental incompatibilities. But I think that kind of subtlety is something you need. You need a much more interior medium to construct. You need a book, and I don't think you can do it in a movie, or at least not any movie I could write.
All right. Well, so let's move on. So they get to this army base where Lena's husband Kane and his squad had been sort of camped out, but they're all gone now. And they find a videotape. Andrew, what'd you think of that videotape?
That was horrible and riveting, and every now and then I checked in on the friend I was seeing the movie with, and her face was attempting to crawl all the way off her head. I mean, that was a mind-bending sequence, and I loved it. Although I also hated every moment of it, just because how often do you get so lovingly rendered a vivisection on screen? And then the idea that the body kept going after he died. The corpse the corpse has spread itself across the wall in multiple parts by the time they find it. It's fascinating and sets up beautifully this idea that things don't really die in Area X the way you expect them to. That the barriers between life and death are a little more porous than we're used to. But yes, the sight of innards moving around like pythons is not something I'm going to forget anytime soon.
Well, and let me talk about the body spread across the wall, because I was trying to think, why do I like this movie so much? Because I feel like people are saying, like, some of the backstory or some of the backstory is a little conventional, some of the characters are a little underdeveloped, etc. But I just love it so much, and I think that one reason is speaking of that body spread across the wall, is because I don't think I've ever seen a movie that was so creepy and so beautiful at the same time. It's just like sort of maxed. It's like a 10 out of 10 of both those things. And it's just a really riveting combination for me, for something to be creepy and beautiful in that way.
I agree. It's gorgeous. Their handling of the strange flowers and the fungi and the mold and the tendrils. Clearly their art director had a really fine time working all this stuff up.
Let's see, Leah, anything you want to add about this army-based stuff before we move on?
Well, specifically the vivisection, what I was thinking of while I was watching it was just that it's essentially a male C-section. It's like a male cesarean section, and that was the first time I've ever seen that. So I thought it was a really interesting way to do that, where he's sort of because he's giving birth to a different type of creature. Like, he's becoming a different type of creature, and it's sort of inside of him. Because we got in a little bit, me and the people that I saw it with. First of all, my screening was extraordinary because it was the most, I have never been in a movie theater that you could feel that much discomfort at various points, that you could hear people moving away. You could see people like shifting their faces away, which was really, we were all sort of in it together, which was great. But we were sort of gotten a little bit of an argument later about whether or not that was consensual, that scene. And my take on it was that the soldier that was being sliced open, yes, it hurt, obviously, but that he was completely willing for them to do it. Because by that point, Area X had taken all of them so much that they sort of wanted to see what he was becoming. And I read that scene as him being okay, like he wanted to see what was going on inside of himself, and was allowing them to do that to him.
I got that impression too.
Cool.
Because either he wanted to know what was going on, or they thought there was some independent entity in there that they were trying to remove.
Yeah. Or free.
I also got that sense, but sorry to interrupt, Leah, but I was just going to add as well that Oscar Isaac's character in that scene looks kind of perversely gleeful as he's cutting open his friend's stomach, which complicated the notion of consent. I mean, it seemed he was taking some pleasure in it, maybe because he's already on his way to losing his mind. But I was sort of fixated on his eyes, which were kind of wide open and excited, which that's the image more even than the, eels or whatever squirming in his belly. That stuck with me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the perfect way to put it. That it was gleeful, and you don't expect, like, the chest burster scene, which that would be the most obvious touchstone for it. The chest burster scene is just horrifying. Everyone in it is just screaming and horrified. So the fact that this was sort of this excitement that they were going to get to see what was happening to him just twisted it in a really fascinating way.
Well, right. I think if we're going to talk about consent, though, I'm almost certain that at one stage in the cutting open, the guy starts saying, like, stop, or wait, or something like that. I mean, okay. I think clearly at the beginning they've all agreed that they're going to do this, and he's like, psyching himself up for it and everything. But I think he does start saying, like, no, stop at a certain point in the cutting open.
Okay, because I've seen it once.
Yeah.
So I know you're on your third time, so you were the expert.
And I don't know if anyone noticed the tattoo on that guy's arm.
The 8?
Yeah. So all right. Well, so I'll come back to this, I think, but just note that this guy has a tattoo on his arm, which is a an infinity sign, like figure 8 kind of thing, which is the worm Ouroboros, this serpent eating its own tail.
Is it the same tattoo that Lena had?
It is the same tattoo that Lena had in the.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
People on Twitter were saying that you should, when you watch the film, you should track the movement of the tattoo.
Yeah. So in the initial.
Wait, what?
So in the initial I guess I'll just talk about it now. So in the initial interrogation scene, you see where Lena's being questioned by the Southern Reach in the frame story. You see that she has this tattoo on her arm, which it's that tattoo. And then in the scenes, before Kane leaves and everything, she doesn't have any tattoos on her arm. And then you see it on that soldier who's getting cut open, and then it pops up on Anya's arm. Oh, you see in the scene where Anya first introduces herself to Lena, you see she has no tattoos on her arm. But then that tattoo pops up on her arm, and from that point on, she's been wearing a tank top up to this point, and after that, she starts wearing a long-sleeved hoodie to hide her arms. But then by the time that Lena shows up at the lighthouse, the tattoo is now on her arm. So yeah, pretty cool stuff.
My arm hair has just gone all bushy. I missed that entirely. Wow.
Oh, and actually, when Lena is being interrogated, she says something about there were corruptions of forms, duplicates of forms, echoes of forms. And when she says echoes of forms, she kind of glances down at that tattoo.
I was going to ask Dave, since you've seen it a number of times, does it reward repeat viewings? Is it a different experience each time, or do you keep noticing new and subtler things like the tattoo?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, I definitely noticed stuff on the third viewing that I hadn't noticed on either of the previous 2 viewings. I didn't notice the tattoo thing really on the second time I noticed that Anya had the same tattoo, but I thought, wait, is that an Area X tattoo or something? But I didn't make the connection that it was jumping from person to person. I read a review that mentioned it, and then the third time I paid attention to that. But Leah mentions the toy that Shepard has that's a memento of her daughter, presumably. After Shepard dies, Josie takes that toy and clips it to her backpack. I didn't notice that until my third viewing. So yeah, and to the conversation with Daniel at the beginning, the guy she's having the affair with, obviously once you know that they're having an affair, that scene plays much differently. So yeah, it definitely, part of the reason I watched it 3 times is because, it is a film that you get something out of watching 3 times for sure. All right, cool. So they leave the army. Let's see, what happens next? They leave the army base and they they decide they're going to stay at this house. The next night, they walk to this house. Is there anything that happens before that, before the zombie bear attack that we should talk about? I don't think so.
Not that I remember, because that is the expository conversation.
Yeah. All right. So
Can I just note for a moment that having established that there are horrible sharkigators in the water, they then happily get into boats and start paddling around, and I'm not sure I would have. I might have considered an overland route at that point.
Well, they're not fully with it either. I mean, they're losing whole tracks of time. Who knows, if they're capable of rational thinking.
Yeah, and it turns out the land fauna is actually considerably worse than the Sharkinator, whatever.
That's true, as they establish in the process of leaving the army base.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of so what happens though with the time is that they, they walk into the shimmer, and then the next we see it's a couple days later, and they have no memory of what's happened from that point, and from the point they entered the shimmer until now. And then there are no other disruptions of time that we
know of.
Well, and that's another thing where I feel like, given how confused Lena is during the interrogation about how much time has passed, I felt like for purposes of that, there should have been more explicit disruptions of time. But then that would just take time in the movie where they would just be like, oh, we lost track of time again. So again, there's just, there's a lot of things that if this were a 4-episode miniseries or something, I feel would have been really good to expand. But given the length constraints of a feature film, I don't know that they should have. But there's just a lot of little things like that it could have been expanded, I think, to good effect. In a perfect world or something. All right, so zombie bear. So Andrew, zombie bear attack. Go.
So there's a nighttime expository conversation happening outside the army base between Lena and the psychologist, and the geophysicist is standing there not far away, and then all of a sudden she's just gone because something very large has grabbed her in its jaws and is dragging her for the fence at high speed. There are horrible screams. Nothing can really be done to rescue her, and she vanishes. And that is taken as a good sign that maybe it's time to pack up and go. And as they traverse the terrain for an abandoned village to the southeast, they find her boots. Lena finds her body a ways off the path among the trees. She is quite dead. And they continue their march to this abandoned little village and set up camp in an empty house. Tell me when you want me to stop.
Well, how about Jason? Why don't you pick it up there? What happens next?
Wait, sorry, Andrew. Where did you stop at the house, the abandoned house?
They get to the house.
Is this where Gina Rodriguez's character is sort of, where she goes crazy and starts interrogating them?
That is correct. Actually, so one thing that happens first is that Lena looks at her blood under a microscope and sees that she's infected with something weird.
Right, and up until that point, who's Gina Rodriguez play? What's her role?
Anya. She's the paramedic. Anya, the paramedic.
The paramedic. Well, she's been glancing down at her arms and seeing some squiggles, and as we know from the vivisection scene, it probably means there are eels inside of her or something, which drives her a little batshit. And she knocks out her fellow travelers. They come to. It's very much sort of a classic interrogation scene, the light swinging above. And she's contemplating whether she should kill them and who knows what. And I guess we didn't establish.
They're all tied to chairs, and she's discovered that Lena's the soldier that they saw in the video doing the vivisection is Lena's
her husband, which only at that point the psychologist knew. So then, of course, this idea of betrayal and paranoia, that's where that sort of fully arrives. And then as she's contemplating what to do, the boar, bear, zombie creature thing crawls up the steps of this house that they're in, and then violence ensues.
First she hears Cass's voice outside screaming for help.
Oh, that's right. Which turns out is coming from inside the zombie bear. And that somehow in killing Cass, the bear has absorbed some bit of her, which is the sound of her screaming right before she dies. So every time it opens its mouth, you hear terrible screams.
Yeah, and so I was watching this scene, and I was like, holy shit, somebody put an El Zabo in a movie. How awesome is this? Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
I do not.
I don't know that one.
Okay, so in Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, there's an alien bear monster called an El Zabo, and it eats the bodies of the recently dead and absorbs their memories, and then it shows up at your door, calling out in the voices of your recently deceased loved ones to let it in.
Well, that's truly horrible.
Yeah.
And so I feel relatively confident that Alex Garland or somebody who worked on this has read that, or it could just be a coincidence, I don't know, but it was still pretty cool to see it, see it come to life in truly terrifying fashion.
I mean, what did we think of the violence in that scene in particular? I mean, by the end, the zombie bear has ripped off the EMT's lower jaw, and you see sort of the entire act of violence.
I was okay with it. It honestly was one of the more intense scenes of violence that I've ever seen in a film. I think specifically because of that, because they show the jaw coming off and they show the aftermath. And obviously the bear is screaming in their friend's voice throughout all of this. But I was okay with it, I think, because since it felt so much like a natural, it was a purely natural attack. Like it was an animal trying to find food, and it had clearly been tracking them from the sort of stand that they had been staying in for that one night, and it had tracked them to the house. So it was an odd feeling, because on the one hand I was like, this is horrifying to watch, but then on the other hand I was like, this is just nature in action, that this thing that's higher up on the food chain of Area X is trying to feed. So I kind of liked that it was as brutal as it was, because I thought it kind of set the stakes. Obviously,
it's a natural attack given a sufficiently flexible definition of natural.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I mean, it's a slightly supernatural attack, but it is also, it's not I found that easier to watch than the scene of Anya interrogating the other three women, because that scene, I was so horrified by the idea that she was going to do something more violent, since she had already knocked all of them out, that she was going to do something violent to them, and then it was going to be one human doing it to another human.
Right. Mindful violence as opposed to animal violence.
I was relieved by the bear, which sounds odd, but I was actually relieved when it came in and stopped her from being violent to them. Because it's like, it was a better kind of violence to have to watch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shot of Anya getting her jaw ripped off it's a very quick shot, and I mean, I thought, like, pretty much from here on out, my brain was just being continuously pulverized into just like a helpless state of like, I can't believe what I'm watching, and that really starts with the zombie bear attack for me. So I was totally on board pretty much from this point on. Andrew, what do you think?
Well, I mean, with the missing jawbone, we'd already established by that point that this is not a movie that is shy about anatomy. So I felt like we had sort of been primed for that. The part of the scene that has really stayed with me is actually there's sort of a hiatus, that Anya goes dashing out because she hears "help me" from the outside. It's not just screaming; it's "help me." It's language. And she dashes out and doesn't come back, and instead this horrible thing comes wandering into the room and sort of snuffles among the chairs. There's this really protracted, extraordinarily tense sequence where this horrible monster is snuffling quietly through the room, weaving among the chairs, saying, "Help me, help me." Like, it's this crazy blend of intelligence and presence and mindless animal. And Garland lets that go on for an excruciatingly long time. It's brilliantly done. Before Anya comes back for round 2 and we go plunging back into sudden horrible violence again. I loved that scene.
And I guess we should say that the zombie bear is taken down by Josie, who has been sort of the most weakest or most afraid character up to this point. So that was kind of a nice moment for her.
Actually, before we leave this scene, can I ask one other question?
Yeah, go for it.
I had some trouble with how badly Anya takes the news that Lena had a history with one of the previous expedition members. And I couldn't tell whether we can write it off as this is a woman who is descended into paranoia. She's already said her fingerprints move when she stares at them. But I just wasn't sure I bought it that this was a big enough betrayal, in air quotes, for her to have snapped that badly. And I just wondered what other people thought of that as a motivating spark. Did it seem plausible?
I think I similarly registered sort of a note of implausibility, but I think you sort of answered the question, which is that, she is in this state of heightened suggestibility, paranoia, and I guess I think that if you're about to go into a deadly, mysterious corner of the planet where you probably won't make it out, you do want to know that one of your, team members' husbands was the only person to come out alive. I don't know. I was able to convince myself in the moment, though I completely agree with you. I was wondering, is she kind of freaking out over much? But I convinced myself that, yeah, that's probably something that should be disclosed. And when you do have, shifting fingertips, you probably are just more sensitive generally to betrayals.
Well, and I think the implication is also not just, there's the very obvious stress of the situation they're in, but also there's the implication that Area X is just degenerating their minds, as Ventress says, that it's almost like early onset dementia or something. But even granted all that, it did sort of strain credibility for me. And this is another thing where I just think, more development of Anya's paranoia would have been good, but then I don't want the movie to be any longer. But this is another one of those things for me where, yeah, it kind of felt too fast, but I don't know what you're gonna do. Which actually, I guess I'll just get, that was, I think probably the moment I had the biggest problem with, and again, it's not such a huge thing, I guess, but in the next scene, okay, so Ventress takes off, she's heading for the lighthouse because she doesn't want to wait. And let her mind degenerate anymore, where the other two survivors decide they're going to wait till morning. And then in the morning, Josie is like acting super weird and has basically come to peace, it seems, with Area X and turns into a tree. And that was like, it just happened way too fast for me. I thought it was kind of a cool idea, but I thought it needed... Even if it was just, it didn't even have to be movie time. It could have happened that fast in movie time, but it should have been like Lena fell asleep or something, wakes up and is like, where's Josie? And then wanders out and there's all the trees. And she just, infers that that's what happened to Josie or something. But just that she walks around the corner and suddenly she's a tree. Nah.
Ooh, but I loved
really
that. But Leah, you should probably take this. It sounds like you've thought a lot about that scene.
Oh, well, I agree to an extent. I loved the imagery of the fact that she starts sprouting plants through the scars that she has on her arms. I just thought was extraordinary. Like, it was it's a pretty big thing among people that have either mutilated themselves for whatever reason, or that have attempted suicide by cutting their arms. It's pretty common to tattoo over it. And to get some sort of, to do a tattoo to cover up the scar. So the fact that instead of having that, like, her scars are just sort of there, but then they're growing this new kind of life out of the scars, was just really moving, like unexpectedly moving to me. But I do agree. And it's also, it's an interesting parallel too with the Ouroboros infinity thing that ends up on the forearms of the other characters, which I hadn't thought of before. But yeah, I would agree that then the way that they shoot it, that she's just basically walking around the corner and then Josie's just gone, but suddenly there's like seemingly an extra plant. I thought that was a little much, because I wanted to see a little bit of the connective tissue where she's sprouting more, like the way that the deer had the cherry blossoms coming out of their antlers. I wanted a little bit more of that for it to be a little more organic feeling. No pun intended, I guess.
I kind of loved the abruptness. I sort of thought that was the whole point of what made the scene both moving and so disturbing for me, because it was sort of the second she accepted Area X, she vanished. Like, it was so fast. And I thought that was so horrifying to me, that like the second you give in, you're gone, or you're different, or you're changed. And so that's what really shook me about that, because it looked like she had made that decision, and then 5 seconds later was no more. And that stuck with me, that sort of idea.
I like
that. Was the aspect I loved most, actually, was that she just vanishes into thin air. You don't see the transformation happening. It's not even clear which of these strange flower trees. And let's take a moment to acknowledge how beautiful those flower trees all were. That was amazing. But you don't see where you can't identify the body, even a transformed body. It's like all other moments of violence in this film. It hits you like a truck before you even know it's coming, and then it's over. It was great. I loved that.
And it spoke to me on this, I guess it's a theme of sort of not quite being able to see around corners or see through things. There's constantly a glare of sunlight in your face this entire movie. And you're sort of squinting and you can't quite make things out, or you're seeing something through a foggy window or through water, or through the barrier of Area X itself. And so you never get that kind of direct line of sight on anything. So following her as she's kind of walking into the trees and then not quite being able to see where she ends up or where she goes, for me felt sort of representative of what the entire movie was trying to do visually.
Well, I really like that idea that once you give in to Area X, you can just vanish in an instant. Maybe if they had spelled that out just a little bit more, it would have worked better for me. But yeah, it was fine. Okay, so now we got the last section, the lighthouse. Okay, so next we see Lena, and she's standing on the beach, and we see the lighthouse in the distance, and there's all sorts of weird crystalline trees, and there's an odd assemblage of skulls and bones in front of the lighthouse. Is there any... Do we know whose bones those are in particular?
It's completely unexplained.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think that is there in the book as well, if I remember correctly. That when they get to the lighthouse, there's sort of a bone structure at the lighthouse.
Did these strike you guys as sort of altars? Every time, there's the back in where they see the video footage, and then the guy is sort of on the wall. That was sort of like I don't know. And then outside the lighthouse, I was getting senses of like sort of religious altars, but who made them and why obviously is the mystery. But I didn't take that thought any further than are these altars, but that's sort of where I ended up on that sort of visual motif.
Right. I think that's something that comes through. That's a holdover from the book, certainly, that, the lighthouse has been a place where people have been holed up repeatedly. And that the grandiose presentation of the bodies is just evidence that whoever was stuck in this lighthouse was quite out of their heads by that point. And that was something that made me sort of sad about once we get into the lighthouse. We never really explore the upper floors. There's a staircase up to somewhere, but you never go up. And I was sad.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I was also kind of frustrated by that. I really wanted to know what was on the upper floor. So the fact that she never went up the stairs was kind of infuriating.
Especially because when you see it from a distance, there is a blazing light coming from the top. Mm-hmm. Like, clearly there is something interesting going on up there, and she doesn't go up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was saying that I read the book 4 years ago, but the part that really sticks out so clearly in my mind is when she gets to the lighthouse and there's just the big stack of journals of all the expeditions from beforehand. Like,
so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part of the book, is that gut punch when the whole narrative upends itself and the narrator suddenly understands that what she thought had been going on was not at all what had been going on. And that the Southern Reach doesn't really care in some way about what everyone is faithfully keeping in these journals, because they end up in a moldering heap.
Well, it's interesting, actually, because one of the big changes from the book is that in the book, the Southern Reach has been investigating Area X for 30 years, and in the movie, it's 3 years. So that's a much different thing. I think it's very implausible that something like this could be going on for 30 years and remain secret. But then you don't get the sort of institutional stuff that I guess that's getting into the second book, which I have read. But yeah, I just want to draw it.
Isn't it implied in the book that the investigations... that Area X has been there and active for much longer than people generally understand? They say that they've been sending in missions for just a few years, but in fact, they've been sending in missions for a lot longer than that. That's just another layer of the deception.
Oh, so you're saying in the movie when they say it's 3 years that's a lie?
It could be. We don't really know. It is a similar lie is told in the book and unveiled.
Okay. Let's get Jason in here. Jason, why don't you tell us about what happens on the boring first floor of the
well, I think I kind of want to talk about what Andrew just pointed out.
No, go ahead.
It's related, which is should she have climbed the staircase? And in the chat we had with Jeff Vandermeer, he said a lot of people read into the tower and the tunnel sort of obvious Freudian images, but he was much more interested, less in that interpretation and more in destabilizing the idea of height and depth, and that, what's up is going down and what's down is going up. In the book, the biologist refers to this tunnel that goes into the earth as the tower, so kind of inverting that spatially. And I kind of liked when she walks into the lighthouse that there is this staircase that she never goes up which is exactly what you'd expect of a character who goes into a lighthouse. But I think for people who don't read the book, to see her go into a lighthouse and then to go sort of into this hole in the ground, is the weirder, kind of more magical thing to do, where she's walking in, you expect up, and she actually goes in or down. Is felt true to the Vandermeerian destabilization, if you will.
I guess we should also say that the reason there's a hole in the ground is because, as we saw in, I think, the opening scene, a meteor had crashed into this lighthouse and sort of punched a hole in the wall and punched a hole in the floor and created this underground cavern or something.
And so that's essentially what happens on that first floor, by the way. Back to your question, she enters, sees this kind of...
Wait, before she enters the hole, though.
I suppose she sees this sort of charred remains of a man, and then a camcorder pointing at it. Somehow the footage is still accessible. She plays it and sees that it looks like her husband is the man whose remains are now before us. He's talking to someone behind the camera. There's a kind of odd mirroring happening. You're not sure what's happening. He lights up, what is it called? A plasma bomb or something? Phosphorus. Right. It instantly vaporizes him in this blinding light. And then out from behind the camera walks her husband. So who was her husband? Who was some alien? That sort of begins this extended sequence where you're there's a lot of doubling and dancing with yourself. I liked Leah earlier. She called it a dance, and it very much is a dance, but maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Well, let me say, in the part where you see Kane, he sort of gives a little monologue to the camera before he incinerates himself, where it's clear that he's completely lost touch of who he is or like what's going on at all.
Does he have an accent in that scene?
He seems to be speaking with a strong Southern accent, which he doesn't have elsewhere in the movie. So I think the implication is supposed to be that, one of his squad mates had a Southern accent, and he's kind of gotten it all scrambled. He's, like the tattoo, he's kind of gotten his accent has gotten scrambled along with, other aspects of himself.
Doesn't he say
he's not sure who he is anymore?
Right. He says into the camera, like, tell Lena, I don't know. He doesn't say tell her I loved her, but he says something about Lena, which makes me think,
find Lena.
Right, that he is the true husband, but then the accent complicated that because is it not her husband, or has he always had this accent and I wasn't paying attention? I didn't know who was, in that moment everything stops making sense, but in the best possible way.
Well, no, but I think the implication seems pretty clear to me that the guy who dies is her husband, and the guy operating the camera is the duplicate.
That was my thought too, and I also was thinking that I just don't know if they built it in quite enough, but that the accent shift was supposed to imply that that the four guys that were there before had sort of morphed into each other. But since we don't really hear the rest, we don't see the other. I guess there were four of them total. We only see the guy that gets vivisected and Kane, Lena's husband. We don't really get a sense of who the other two were. So, we sort of have to embroider a bit when we see that scene.
Yeah, and in reviews I read, there was a lot of confusion about, his accent is so bad. It didn't come through, I think, to many, many, many people that was intentional.
Yeah.
I remember during that monologue wondering, wait a minute, has he had this accent the whole time and I wasn't paying attention? But it would have been very simple, and perhaps in an earlier cut with a slightly longer version of the vivisection video. All we needed was for another member of that squad to say 6 words with that accent, and it would have brought it home much more cleanly.
Yeah. That would have been.
And I just wonder if that opportunity was taken but then cut for time or something.
Well, I read, maybe Dave, you know better, that there was a version of this that Alex Garland had originally cut that the studio was unhappy with. I don't know if it was changed or if this is the version he wanted it to be. Am I making this up?
No, well, that's a whole big thing. But I guess we can get into it. So basically, they made this movie and they screened it, and the test audience was like, I don't get it. And then the studio said, you need to change it to like make the ending more like happy or whatever, and Natalie Portman needs to be more sympathetic and stuff like that. But Alex Garland and his producer, whose name I think is Scott Rudin, had like their contract or whatever said that they had final cut. And so they said, nope, we're keeping it the way it is.
Oh, cool.
But that's why, I don't know if you followed this, but that's why the studio then sold the foreign rights to Netflix because they didn't think that it was going to do well in theaters, and they were trying to basically cut their losses. So no, this movie is the way that Alex Garland wants it. The only thing I saw about cutting stuff was that he said that there was a 10-minute sequence that he cut, which sounds honestly pretty stupid to me, so I'm glad he cut it, where Lena, like, when she, at the very beginning, before they go into the shimmer, she, like, busts out of her cell and, like, gets up to the roof on her own and sees the shimmer. And so actually the scene and they didn't reshoot it, they just, like, cut it in such a way as to get to excise that, like, little subplot. And then the only other thing I've seen that was cut was that at the very end, in the original script, you saw like a whole rain of meteors falling in the sky, and they cut that out. But aside from that, as far as I know, this is like exactly how it was written and how it was shot and everything, and there was no studio interference.
Good to know.
Cool.
But yes, so how about Andrew? Tell us about this cave, this going into the underground area.
Oh, you bastard! Well, what happens in the cave is something that I think no linear mind could fully explain. What we do know is she crawls into the hole, and it's again reminiscent of H.R. Giger in that it's definitely not terrestrial architecture. It's strange and shiny and fluted and seems to have these arches that all go off in different directions. And in the center is a low platform where we find the psychologist, who for a moment, her something is wrong with her face. But then she turns around, and by the time she's looking directly at Lena, her face is more or less the way we expect it to be. And she fairly shortly thereafter turns into a fountain of light.
Actually, okay, so since I've seen it 3 times, I'll pick up. So she
yeah, please.
So she gives,
I barely understood it then. I can't reconstruct it now.
Yeah, so she gives a monologue that goes basically, I used to wonder what the shimmer was, but now I understand. It's inside me now. It's going to destroy, it's going to like expand, and it's going to break us down into our smallest parts until nothing remains. Annihilation.
Yes. Ding, ding, ding.
At which point a sort of like light starts glowing in her throat and shoots out of her mouth, and her whole body sort of like burns up like a like a candle wick, and giant sort of undulating like ribbons of light start swirling around in the air. And then let's see.
Okay, I can.
Okay. Wait. All right, and so then the ribbons of light sort of, I think, I might be missing a step here, sort of coalesce into this big, impossible to describe thing, which is a sort of shifting swirls of like smoky ribbons with sort of pulsing light at their center. And it has a sort of like glowing mouth that opens up like the petals of a flower. And Lena is staring into it, and a drop of blood sort of gets sucked into it. And the drop of blood just starts dividing and forms into a sort of humanoid figure of a sort of iridescent, abstracted character.
Sort of a shimmering Naugahyde store mannequin thing.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah. Well, it's funny because in the interrogation scenes where they say, "Can you describe it?" and she's like, "Nope." And it is very difficult to describe. So I sympathize with her there. So how about Leah? You have anything you want to add at this point?
I think you did an admirable job, actually, of trying to describe
this is what happens when you see it 3 times. All right, so at this point, Lena is facing off against the mannequin thing, and whips out her machine gun and starts firing bullets at it. And as the bullets pass through its body, they sort of create these swirls of matter in the air around it, sort of like I don't even know how to describe it. Sort of there's these swirly patterns coming out of it. And she runs up out of the cave and into the lighthouse, only to find the thing is now there, standing, blocking her way. So, Jason.
Oh.
Tell us your perspective on what happens next.
I feel like we each in turn get this dread having to describe what happens. You almost don't want to describe what happens. And I, in writing about it, very consciously avoided any reference whatsoever to this scene because it's sort of something you just kind of have to experience. And I will say the CG felt very present. Obviously, I mean, it's this undulating kaleidoscopic mass that's hovering that turns into this mannequin. But I didn't mind how computer generated it looked because maybe this alien technology is just that. It's alien technology. But anyway,
actually, let me add one thing about the undulating mass in the air. Like, I thought it was freaking awesome. And the sound design, like both visually and the sound design, it's like, it's just like, it was as close to a religious experience as I'm ever likely to have, like watching that freaking thing. It was so, again, I was just like pulverized. My brain was just pulverized into, like, I could just sit there and stare in awe. Okay, but sorry. So then she, yeah. So
yeah. I mean, I blacked out so much of this, but like it's at one point I don't know if it touches Lena, but it eventually the mannequin, this iridescent mannequin, long-limbed thing, transforms into a clone, I suppose, of Lena, the biologist, and she's trying to escape, and it's trying to keep her there, and they kind of move in perfect. It looks like the creature is very actively mirroring everything Lena's doing, but it's just sort of a half step behind. So it has this weird, why is it mirroring it? Is it exactly a mirror? And it becomes this incredible extended sequence where they're shifting and moving around the apartment, and it's attacking Lena, but also seems to be trying to keep her there for some reason. And it eventually ends. Am I going too far?
No, that's good. Yeah.
With a return to the phosphorus, she somehow ignites the phosphorus bomb when the creature's holding it, and it kind of very slowly explodes.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a very strong impression throughout this whole scene that the creature is like, I don't know, is sort of like weirdly childlike and like doesn't understand what's going on and is like acting somehow like reflexively or something. Do other people share that impression?
Yeah.
I found myself thinking of Peter Watt's Blind Sight, which I read last summer, which is this fabulous science fiction novel that talks about the question of whether you can have an intelligence without a conscience. It definitely, the short version being, it talks a lot about what an alien intelligence would need to do and need to think and whether we would be able to relate to it in any way. And I found myself thinking, is this mannequin thing trying to communicate?
Right.
Or is it just mirroring its environment because it's trying to figure out what's going on or pursue goals of its own? Does it know that she's there as an intelligent individual, or is she just more building material that it's trying to figure out what to do with? It's fascinating. You definitely feel like she has run up against something that has its own mind and its own agenda, and it is entirely possible that the two of them are never, ever going to be able to communicate in a meaningful way. It was fascinating. Oh,
sorry, I left out part of Ventress's monologue is she says, "I don't know what it wants or if it wants." And that's something that Lena echoes in her interrogation later, where she says, like, "I don't know if it wanted anything. It mirrored me, like, I attacked it." So yeah, there's the very strong implication that the thing does not have motivations.
Well, I like when she notes that she attacked it, because she certainly does and did. And yeah, throughout the entire sequence, I didn't really ever get the sense that this thing wanted to cause her any kind of harm, even when it was very kind of violently trying to keep her in the room. It was almost, I felt, doing it to try to communicate something. I don't know. I was kind of on the creature's side, weirdly, and then I was mad at her for being so just trying to get out of there when she had this opportunity to understand what this thing was. But then she very kind of self-awarely says in the interrogation later that it was she who attacked it. So there was I thought a bit of note of regret or remorse that, like, she was the antagonist there. I don't know.
Well, I think that ultimately she approaches it, she's a cancer specialist, and I think she makes this value judgment that whatever it thinks it's doing, it is ultimately a cancer on her local reality. It is scrambling everything, it's ruining everything, it's killing people, and that you can't, if it's taking that, if it's that destructive, you can't negotiate with it if it won't talk to you. You just have to cut it out. And so she moves directly to, now I'm going to blow it up.
And she's able to just place the phosphorus grenade into its hand, and, it doesn't resist or anything. It doesn't have any idea what's going on.
Exactly.
Leah, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was really intrigued because, yeah, I was also on the creature's side for a lot of that, because it was just extremely, it just made me wonder, like, if she hadn't gone for the gun immediately, what would have happened if she hadn't attacked it? And then, because presumably this is what happened to Kane. Presumably Kane was doubled and didn't attack his double, or at least didn't kill his double. So their experiences...
He seems to have made friends with his, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, kind of. So, or at least like enough to teach it to use a camcorder. But like, it's pretty cool. But yeah, it was really interesting to me because it was such a complex scene of, like, I completely understood her revulsion, because that I completely agree with the cancer analogy, because I think it was just she was just so repulsed immediately. And just wanted to stomp this thing and get it away from her. Which I thought was, yeah, I just thought that they dealt with it in a really beautiful way. But I was, the entire scene, I was wondering what would have happened if she took the other path, basically, and didn't go for the gun.
Right. So this thing, and I don't know if we said explicitly, but it starts turning from a mannequin thing into a duplicate of her. Right before she sets off the phosphorus grenade. And then it's on fire, and it accidentally sets the lighthouse on fire, and it accidentally sets Kane's desiccated corpse on fire, and it sort of crawls down into the cave and sets everything down there on fire. And so Lena stumbles out of the lighthouse, and the whole lighthouse goes up in flames, and when it does, all the manifestations of Area X sort of collapse into flaming ruins, sort of like magma, like ruins, which, again, one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And that's pretty much all that happens, right? And then we go back to the interrogation. Is there anything? Then we're back in the frame story in the interrogation. Is there anything else anyone wants to say about the lighthouse before we get on?
Just that I loved the crystal trees, because as you get, to me, what that was is a signpost that you have gone so deep into Area X that now not only have we blenderized the animal and vegetable kingdoms, but the mineral kingdom is getting in on the act. that all divisions are really breaking down at this point.
Right, and crystals, of course, refract, and I mean, it becomes such this scene about, like we've been talking about, doubles and refractions and echoes and mirrors, and who's what and what's real. And so the crystal trees, like Andrew's saying, were kind of a beautiful way to cue that up.
Okay, so it appears that Area X has been destroyed, that the Shimmer vanishes, and Lena tells her whole story to the Southern Reach, although she's not able to give them very satisfactory explanations for anything that's happened, understandably. And then they say that Kane, who we now know really is the Kane duplicate, that he's sort of recovered. I think we kind of elided some of the stuff, but he was. They took him to the hospital. He's coughing up blood at the beginning, but now he's fine. And so Lena goes in to talk to him, and they have a very brief conversation where she says, "You're not really Kane, are you?" And he says, "I don't think so." And he says, "Are you Lena?" And then she just kind of like, I don't think she says anything. I think she just kind of looks at him, and then he stands up and embraces her, and we see sort of colorful rainbow light playing about his irises. And then we see a shot of her, and the same thing is happening with her. And then the movie's over. Oh, it gives me just chills just thinking about it.
I think that's kind of the worst part of the whole movie.
Okay, well, let's talk. So why is that the worst part of the
Well, you neglected to mention the truly worst part, where they're like, so it's aliens, in their sort of conclusion to the interrogation, which, sure, obviously it's some sort of alien intelligence, but in that moment, hearing the word alien at the end of the movie, like, is it an alien? Isn't it an alien? Oh, it is an alien. I was just sort of so, like, deflated, and just kind of pretended it never happened. And really everything after the implosion of Area X, I didn't really need. I get why it's there, but I'd prefer just not to fixate on it.
Andrew, what do you think about that?
I was also quite unsatisfied with the ending. I think, as I said up at the top, I much preferred a less neatly tied bow on Area X, with that sort of Hollywood. I mean, it's not quite, and then the hand leaps up out of the grave and the monster isn't dead after all. It's a much more soft-pedaled version of that trope. That we think we've solved it with a bomb, but no, we haven't really. And it felt too Hollywood. I loved the way the book just allowed her to wander off into the wilderness to see what there is to learn and to continue to look for the original version of her husband, whom she believes is still alive. But I can picture that if you are trying to turn a very strange book into a film that Hollywood is going to let you make, that kind of ending is maybe not going to make it through the first draft.
Leah, what do you think?
First of all, I agree that there's no way that they were going to let her just walk off into the woods at the end. First of all, I completely also blacked out the fact that I think it's Benedict Wong is the actor, that he says, "Oh, so it's aliens." I had honestly forgotten that until you said it, because I remember at that moment just kind of shuddering. Like, why did you put this kind of period on this amazing sequence? But I chose to go with the idea that, first of all, that it is the original Lena that comes back out, because I think that there's also been some talk about whether or not it is her, or if she and her double swapped during the period when she gets knocked out in the lighthouse, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I'm going with the idea that she's taken some of Area X into her, so that she is now not fully human, or she's more than human, I suppose would be the better way to put it. So I go back and forth. Part of me hates the glowing eye thing because it does feel like sort of the question mark after the end, on the end title. But I also like the idea that Lena has become something else. And I was also really emotionally invested in their embrace, because especially after the dance with the double, I was worried for just a second in that scene when he first gets up. I was worried that it was going to go violent again, and that she was going to rush at him, or that he was going to rush at her, and that it was going to turn into another confrontation, like sort of a button on the whole thing, to have a confrontation between the two of them. And the fact that instead he just sort of puts his arms around her, more like a kid, more like a child looking for some sort of acceptance than anything else. And that she just sort of accepts that back and embraces him back. That part I was completely willing to go with. But then, yeah, the glowing eye, I'm of two minds. So I am my own double.
In the screening I saw, the second the eyes glowed, the guy sitting next to me says to his friend, like, well, they set that up for a sequel. And it's like, I just hate that that's what the immediate reaction to that scene is, which is true at like the most superficial level. But that's like not the first thing I want anyone to say after seeing that movie. That like, oh, there's going to be another one. Because that just seemed to undo so much of the mystery and, I don't know, complication of the film. And then the fact that it had to be eyes, which is so, such a visual cop-out. It's like, and, Mystique blinking at the end of any X-Men movie. It's like, oh my God. And so I was really disappointed in that as well. I mean, it could have been any number of visual surprises. Like maybe her arm is squiggling with eels, or maybe the tattoo shows up in a cooler place. The fact that their eyes had to shimmer that way was pretty dreary.
See, that's why you shouldn't have been sitting next to that guy. See, that's
Probably.
why when I saw this movie, I sit in the chairs that have nobody behind you and nobody to either side of you. So that, like, no, I can't hear anyone talking during the movie. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's other stuff they could have done, I'm sure. I kind of liked the ending, though, because I just felt like, it sort of, I mean, they can't have her wandering off into the woods to find her husband, like in the book, because, like, the husband is a burnt up husk, and then there's this other guy that they've established is back in the Southern Reach, right? So, like, I feel like they had to tie that up somehow. And I just like the idea that, they're in this, like they're together, and like people are saying, like there's no implication that the shimmer phenomenon is evil or malicious or anything. It's just changing things. And if you're highly invested in the status quo of the human race, obviously this is not a good thing. But I felt like the ending was sort of weirdly upbeat in a way. Like it's sort of again, it's like creepy and beautiful, like the whole movie is, and that's like the strength of it to me.
Well, if you're on the side of Area X, it's definitely upbeat.
But it's not like 100. It's not, it's like it's a weird mix of creepy and beautiful. It's not one or the other.
I thought Area X seemed pretty evil in the movie. In the book, it's much more ambiguous. In the book, it's sort of a surrogate for global warming, as Jeff Vandermeer has said many times. And there's nothing of that in the movie. It seems very much a cancer, very much malicious. Of course, complicated by the fact that that creature at the very end doesn't seem maybe evil.
There's the scene though where she sees the beautiful deer with the, as Leah mentioned, with the, what was it, cherry blossoms or something on their antlers, and that's like those aren't hostile. That's like the beautiful, peaceful nature part of Area X.
Sure,
that's a great little sequence.
It's amazing. Sorry, Andrew.
No, that's okay. It's also it's another set of twins, and it leads you to wonder that perhaps if Lena hadn't come out shooting and had been able, perhaps if Lena had been a less intelligent animal, would the strange alien in the basement just have continued to mirror her movements and follow her through the woods?
Mm-hmm.
Because right. I think the two deer, although they look very similar, if memory serves, one of them does look strangely like one of them doesn't look exactly like the other. You have
Yeah.
the one on the far side of the one closer to the camera does have a slightly different skin to it. I mean, it was a very fleeting impression.
No,
definitely.
no. The one in the foreground is white, and then the one in the background is like a weird, like, well, what's the word? But it has like patches of green and red and gray or something like that. Piebald is the word I'm looking for, although I'm not sure that's the right word. But yeah, they're definitely different for sure.
I like that idea, because that was sort of what I was coming away with, was just that if she had responded to the creature differently, then she could have sort of written a different ending for it. It didn't have to go violent. And I wanted to see what her double would look like. And I like the connection with the two deer, because those two have clearly learned to work together and hop around in unison through the forest. So, yeah. Although I guess by the end, she and Kane are they're sort of each other's double by the end,
right,
since they've each knocked out the other double. So
that if humanity is going to find some sort of joining up with whatever is the engine behind Area X, it's going to have to look more like this, because the straight up twinning doesn't work quite so well. Our minds can't quite take it.
All right, cool. So there are two little Easter eggs I just want to mention. I think they're actually kind of dumb, but they're kind of interesting. So Kane has a tattoo on his chest of a bear, which sort of foreshadows the zombie bear attack, I guess. And then the house that they stay in, where they get attacked by the zombie bear, has the exact same floor plan as Lena and Kane's house that we see them in the past. The same, like, rooms and staircase and everything.
Cool. I actually thought that when I saw it, but then I thought I must be wrong. So cool.
But that doesn't really make any sense to me. Cause it's all about mixing genes and stuff. It's not about, like, that's like a Solaris type thing. Like, it's pulling stuff out of your memory and recreating duplicate versions of it or something. But I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense in this story, but I don't know. You like it though?
I like the idea that it's responding to them, but I do think that if they were going to go with that in the film, that maybe they should have made it a little clearer. Because yeah, I noticed that when they first went into the house, and I was wondering if she was going to go upstairs again, like she never goes upstairs, if she was going to go upstairs and find a Kane double there. But then I was like, since they didn't make any more of the idea that the architecture was the same, then I thought I must just be remembering it wrong, because then it kind of didn't lead anywhere. It was just sort of there. So yeah, I think if they were going to do that, the idea that if Area X is actually molding itself around their consciousnesses, that they maybe should have done a little bit more of it so that you would pick up on it more throughout the film. Because that would be cool.
It's actually interesting. Speaking of that house, if you go back and rewatch the movie, in the very opening stuff, when the Kane, what we know is by the end is the Kane double, you see him, when he walks up the stairs to see her, he kind of stops and looks at the pictures on the wall. And if you're rewatching it, you can tell from the expression on his face, he's like, I don't know what these pictures are. I don't know who these people are. You know, he's totally like, you know, it's not like a guy returning home to a familiar house. He's just like, I don't know where I am or what's going on.
Interesting.
So I thought that was cool.
Cool. I definitely want to see it again before it leaves theaters. Because I do want to I want to have the full sensory experience of it again.
Well, that's the thing, is that I feel like, I mean, as I was saying with this Netflix deal, most people are not going to be able to see it in theaters. It's only in theaters in the US, I think Canada and China or something like that, and everywhere else it's just going straight to Netflix. And I feel like if I watched this on my laptop, I feel like I would have been like, that was pretty cool. But I don't think I would have had anything like the reaction that I had to seeing it in the theater.
I agree. Like, this is, to me at least, this is the definition of why you would go to a movie in the theater. Like, this is what you want to get out of a film in the theater. This sort of full sensory thing where it's actually leaving you feeling something and it's leaving you thinking about it rather than just, something you can put on in the background while you're like folding laundry or whatever. And it's kind of heartbreaking to me to think that people are just going to put this on their TV and then do other stuff and like be on their phone or whatever and not have the experience that I got to have because I'm in this country. That is kind of upsetting.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's part of the reason I went and saw it 3 times, because I'm like, oh, it's probably going to be, out of theaters pretty soon, and then I'll never be able to see it in the theater ever again, and that's just, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Although, I mean, hopefully this will be, I mean, I feel like it has the potential. This has, like, interesting cult movie written all over it.
Completely.
And hopefully people will, like, this will be one that, a generation from now, people show at midnight at, like, Videology or Nighthawk or whatever. So people can
I'll be there.
Yes. We will meet up.
That would be kind of amazing if we all reunited 10 years from now. Let's plan on it. Yeah.
All of us having acquired the Ouroboros tattoo.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I guess actually no, we'd have to see it in Florida. We would have to go see it in Florida for the true experience.
All right, well, pencil it in, guys. That'll be episode 1298 if you just get to the guys.
It's a date.
Yes.
But no, it's heartbreaking too that this, I think is so good. I mean, I know it's not for everyone, but I think it's so good, and it's not, it's not going to be in a lot of theaters. It's obviously not going to make a lot of money, and it just makes you wonder what's the future for original, serious, like offbeat science fiction movies like this on the big screen. It seems kind of,
Also, like, PSA, like, if it sounds like this is a movie you should see under the influence of substances, like, so many people are like, well, I should get high for this. No. Like, you want to be stone cold sober for this viewing experience because it's just way too intense. Anyway, I thought
you'll be questioning reality enough.
Exactly.
As it is.
Like, you don't, exactly. You don't want any kind of external exacerbator.
But yeah, I don't know. If everyone listening to this goes out and buys 50 tickets, that's probably still not even enough. But I mean, I don't know. I sort of fantasize that this gets enough word of mouth that, I don't know, I guess the Netflix deal is already in place and everything. I don't know what could change, but I want more, I want more movies like this. So I don't know.
Well, it's clearly going to be a movie that lives and dies by word of mouth, even just for its domestic run. Is it still going to be in the theaters next weekend or not is all about the people who saw it this weekend talking it up. You definitely get the feeling that the studio has kind of washed its hands.
Oh, that's so sad.
I read an interesting article, though, and it was saying don't blame the studios, that they make Blade Runner 2049 and people don't go see it, and they make this and people don't go see it. Like, it's not their fault if they don't keep spending money on movies like this. It's the fault of people, like if the audience wants movies like this, you gotta, if you want to watch movies like this in the theater, you got to go to the theater to see it. So I did my part.
Excellent.
And we talked about it for 2
promise
hours.
I'll go again.
I mean, there are so few movies that you sort of want to talk about for 2 hours, and this movie is certainly one of them. So let that be an endorsement in itself.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Maybe.
Well, I think that is a. Oh, sorry, Leah?
Oh, I was just saying maybe this will help.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. But all right, so I think that's a good note to end on. And so we've been speaking with Jason Kehe, Leah Schnelbach, and Andrew Willett. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love talking about this movie again.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Jason Kehe, Leah Schnelbach, and Andrew Willett for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to Jared Martin, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank Alexandra Monier for sponsoring today's show. Check out her new novel, The Final Six, over at alexandramonier.com. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.